Hebrews 12, verse 3 to 17, sets before the hearers a contrast between weariness and endurance, between the fading order and the unshakable reality that had all inaugurated in their midst. The passage opens with a call to consider Christ, he who endured hostility from sinners against himself. His suffering is not presented merely as an example of patience, but as the decisive moment in which the Old Covenant world reached its climax. The opposition he faced was not random. It arose from those bound to a system that was passing away. Yet he endured, pressing through rejection, shame, and death until the work was complete. In him, the fullness of God's purpose stood accomplished. The audience is reminded that their own struggle had not yet reached the same measure. The language evokes a contest, a striving, yet it is framed within the reality that the decisive victory had already been secured in Christ. What remained for them was not to achieve what he had already finished, but to stand within it. The writer then speaks of discipline, not as punishment, but as sonship. The chastening described is not the wrath of God against sin, for that had been borne fully and finally in Christ. Rather, it is the necessary transition from one covenantal reality to another. The shaking they experienced, the pressures and trials were the marks of a people being brought out of the old order and established in the new. To be without such discipline would mean to remain outside this transition, to be untouched by the movement from shadow to substance. But those who endured it were revealed as sons, participants in what God was bringing to completion. The contrast between earthly fathers and God sharpens the point. Earthly discipline is temporary and limited, shaped by human judgment. But God's dealing with his people is purposeful and perfect, bringing them into participation in his holiness, not a holiness attained by effort, but one granted through union with Christ and realized as the old structures gave way. The passage acknowledges that discipline is not pleasant in the moment. It is sorrowful, weighty, and difficult, yet its outcome is described as the peaceful fruit of righteousness. This righteousness is not something produced by human striving, but the settled state of those who stand within the finished work of Christ, now brought into visible expression as the old covenant fades. The exhortation follows: strengthen the hands that hang down and the feeble knees. The imagery suggests a community on the verge of exhaustion, tempted to turn back. But the call is to continue forward, to make straight paths, not to forge a new way, but to walk clearly in what had already been established so that what is weak would not be turned aside. Peace and holiness are then set forth as the defining realities to be pursued. Yet these are not conditions to be achieved for acceptance. They are the characteristics of the new covenant life into which they had been brought. To fail to recognize this, to fall short of the grace of God, is to miss the very reality that had been freely given. The warning concerning a root of bitterness draws from covenantal imagery, recalling the dangers of turning back to what had already been judged. Such a root would not remain isolated. It would spread, defiling many, pulling them away from the clarity of what had been accomplished. Esau is then presented as a final illustration. He stands as one who traded what was his by birth for something immediate and passing. His loss was not due to lack of opportunity, but to a failure to value what had already been his. When he later sought to reclaim it, the moment had passed. The inheritance could not be re-entered on different terms. So the passage holds together both assurance and warning. The assurance rests entirely in what Christ has finished: his endurance, his suffering, his exaltation. The warning concerns the danger of turning away from that finished reality, of exchanging it for something lesser, something bound to what was already vanishing. In all of this, the focus remains fixed. Christ has endured, the transition has been accomplished, and what remains is the unveiling of that unshakable kingdom in the lives of those who stand within him.